First, giving honor to God, to Pastor Johnson, and to all of the officers and members of this great historic church. First, I thank God for another day. A day that we neither earned or deserved. Too often we get up in the morning like God owed us another day, or like we did something to earn another day. But I don't care how holy you are. I don't care how saved you look to us. All of us have done enough wrong that any night we sleep, if God just checked the record, none of us would see the next morning. So every day is a gift from God. That's why folks traveling with me always checking the app for the weather. I don't ever go on the app, because every day is a good day to me. Could be a good cold day, good hot day, good rainy day, good dry day. Don't matter to me. Every day I get up, I realize God gave me another day. And I'm glad that God reserves that decision all to himself. If my critics had a vote, I might not have got up this morning. Then I'm happy to be here at this great historic church on Martin Luther King weekend, and it is really a intersection of both emotions, because when I was 11 or 12 years old, I'd already been a boy preacher in the Church of God in Christ for a minute, and I became enthralled watching the news. My parents had separated, and I couldn't play with the other kids a lot because they didn't want to play with a boy preacher because they was going to use language they didn't want their mamas to know they used. So I watched the news a lot, and I became enthralled with the image of Adam Clayton Powell. And I was around 11, and I convinced my mother to let me come up to this church to see Adam Clayton Powell. And in those days, people in Brooklyn used to say it's dangerous to go to Harlem. And folk in Harlem, you say it's dangerous to go to Brooklyn. But I convinced my mother, and she let my sister, who was 3 years older than me, ride the number 2 train, it's number 3 now, to 135th Street. And I came, sat right back there, and Adam Clayton Powell walked down this platform. And I remember after this church, in those days, Johnson, the pastor's study was right in the side with a plexiglass, and I knocked on the door, and I told the secretary I wanted to meet Reverend Powell. She looked down this little 11-year-old boy. She said, "Really?" She said, "Who should I say?" I said, "Reverend Al Sharpton." And she kind of smiled and went back and sat down. So I knocked again, and it was kind of door that the top of the door opened and the bottom was still there. That's how it used to be. And I knocked again. She came back a little annoyed, and I repeated it, and she went somewhere and came back, and with a little confused look on her face, said, "Come after me." She brought me in the back, and we went through this door, and Adam Powell was standing there. He said, "You're the boy preacher from F.D. Washington's church in Brooklyn." I said, "You know me?" He said, "I listen to the broadcast sometime." He said, "I got the mortgage for that church." And it started a relationship in my preteen years. My hero was Adam Clayton Powell. Yes. I used to call Deacon Clark, who used to live next door, Odell Clark, and find out when they was Reverend Powell was coming to town. They let me ride Jack Packett at a station wagon that used to drive Dr. Powell. So he was my original hero. And my mother was afraid I would get involved too much in non-church stuff, so she brought me to Bishop Washington. And Bishop Washington said, I know what to do. And he brought me, at that time, there were 2 streets in Brooklyn. President Street, we call them Preachers Row. And on those 2 blocks lived Gardner Taylor, Sandy Ray, William Augustus Jones, Bishop Washington, Thomas J. Boyd. And Bishop Washington brought me across the street to Reverend William Jones and said, we know what to do, we'll keep him in the church, put him in Breadbasket and make him youth director. And Breadbasket was the economic arm of Dr. King's organization. And I became the youth director of that chapter the year Dr. King was killed. And Reverend Jones brought me to Jesse Jackson, and the rest was history. And in many ways, I thought about that when Reverend Johnson asked me to come on this Sunday, because what few people understand is what we have done with Operation Breadbasket, what we did with Jesse, our national director, Dr. King, did in Montgomery, an economic boycott, started right here in Abyssinia. The first boycott that was successful for blacks was in 1941 in Harlem, and it was led by Adam Clayton Powell Jr. before he even went to the city council. In fact, Martin Luther King said that he studied Reverend Adam Clayton Powell's book, Marching Blacks, that was published in 1940s, I believe it was 44, 43, and that was the story of the Harlem boycott. And it showed you how progressive Adam Powell was. In 1940s, he was calling us black. But most of us were still colored. We got the Negro in the 50s. So it's with that intersection that I come this morning. And then I also come because, as he stated, for the last several years of his life, I was blessed and honored to work with Reverend Dr. Calvin O. Butts III. And he and I working on this health thing. We always in the movements had different strategies. We act like Dr. King was the only one in the 60s. There were a lot of us. I was a kid. I met Dr. King twice. I worked very closely with his son. But there was Roy Wilkins, NAACP. There was James Farmer, CORE. There was Whitney Young of the Urban League. There was Dr. King. There was A. Philip Randolph. There was Dorothy Height. There was Malcolm up north. They all had different ways and tactics, but they all was trying to get to the same place. And even when we were not as close as we ended up being, Calvin Butts and I always was trying to get to the same place. And I was so glad to see Mrs. Butts here this morning. And to know that I think the last TV show Calvin did was my show, Politics Nation. I convinced him to do it from the house. And it's a testimony that either you can mature or you can get old. Some of us just get old and don't mature. But as I talked about the Harlem bus boycott and all the way to Montgomery, people forget what made Dr. King known. This is King weekend, and we have the holiday, and a lot of our young people don't know we had to march and go to jail to get the holiday. Ronald Reagan, who was president, had called Dr. King a communist. But as God was having, he ended up having to sign the bill to make Dr. King a federal holiday. And talking about jail, my daughters are here and my grandson. Y'all write down that they don't have that in my bio. One of my achievements is the first time Kevin Johnson and Raphael went to jail was I took them. That's a distinction. Raphael Warnock and Kevin Johnson, I brought them in, so I wasn't going to tell it, but you told on yourself. So we know the sanitized Dr. King. But we don't know the Dr. King that stood up, indicted for stealing money out of the Montgomery Improvement Association, dragged through the mud. And Dr. King all that happened because of that Montgomery boycott. I preached at Dexter Avenue, the church he pastored. I preached there 3 Sundays ago, and I was reminded of the stories from some of them. But again, he learned it from Adam right here in this church. And that's why tomorrow in Washington, they're going to inaugurate President Trump, 47th President of the United States, which he won the election. But across town at Metropolitan AME, we're having a rally, church where Frederick Douglass was funeralized, church where we brought Rosa Parks' body, and we're going to start a 90-day countdown. We're going to start some of these companies that want to end DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Well, they can do that. But you cannot end diversity, equity, and inclusion and have diverse consumers. So we're going back to the King Adam thing. We're going to call some boycotts in about 90 days. So since you don't want to assure us of nothing, we will buy from those that will give us what it is that we think we deserve. And the Senate and the Congress and the President, Congressman, the FBI, they can't make no legislation to make us buy where we are not respected. So when we start withdrawing our dollars, if Adam Powell could do it in the 30s, if Martin Luther King could do it in the 50s, then what's wrong with us with all this stuff we got to work with? I mean, I don't understand it. They closed the country down. Do you understand that Dr. King never knew what a cell phone was? Never had social media, never knew Facebook, never knew Instagram. And here we got all these ways to communicate. Got 2 cell phones in your pocket. On Instagram. On TikTok, they about to knock you out, but you're on everything else. Got 50 ways to communicate and can't get 5 Negroes together to do nothing. We've grown weaker and wiser. And we need to go back to the tactics. And you don't have to march with me. You can, but you don't have to. You don't have to go to jail. All you got to do is don't shop where you're not respected. And that's our history. Let me ask you to turn to the book of Daniel. Third chapter, 12th verse. And again, I want to thank Pastor Johnson for inviting me. You know, I preached for him several times in Philly. He never held it against me that I got him to go to jail. And they kept him 5 or 6 hours. I don't want to start no trouble, but I know one of the great Sunday school teachers of the church is D.A. Alvin Bragg, is a friend of mine. And I got to find out, did y'all hold Trump 5 or 6 hours? I'm just asking. I might protest if they didn't. And the Bible says there are certain Jews whom you've set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And We want you to know that when the music plays, they have not bowed. I want to use for thought, I'm going to stop right there. I want to use for thought, don't bow. Don't bow. We are being told that we are in precarious times. Tomorrow, while we're rallying, Donald Trump will be sworn in, and he has said that he's going to start immediately with an aggressive immigration policy, mass deportation. He's already said they're going into Chicago. I had the mayor of Chicago on the phone with us last night. He also said he's going to sign executive orders against DEI. He says he's going to do several things. And there is a debate among many of how to deal with Trump. Some say, well, we ought to go to Mar-a-Lago and see him. When he got elected the first time, he called me and invited me to Mar-a-Lago, and I've known Donald Trump 30-some years, marched on him about Central Park 5. We had several encounters. And he said, we can talk. I said, I will only talk to you if we can bring all the civil rights leaders. I don't know them. I said, well, I'm not doing the photo op. And I didn't meet with him. Then when we got Choose Healthy Life going with Dr. Butts and I, we called and tried to get them to help get the churches. And it's interesting to me. When Biden got in and Mrs. Jill Biden came to this church, walked with Sister Butts and Dr. Butts, getting vaccination for people. The guy they putting over health now had people marching on the corner of this church against black church folks getting vaccination. That's right. I'm not talking about back in the day, I'm talking about a couple years ago. Marched on a black church if black people wanted to be vaccinated. They go into power tomorrow. And they're going to threaten a lot of things, and they're going to say that we must bend and buckle and bow to them. They're in charge. But I come to remind you that this church and the black church was not built on that. We were built on what we stand and stood up for, not what we bowed down to. When Adam Clayton Powell Sr., 1908, moved this church from downtown and bought the lots here on 138th Street and built this building, blacks were not building neo-Gothic cathedrals like this. They had Riverside for that side of town. The Powells saw something that people didn't see. If you're going to make history, you got to let God use you in ways that others have not seen. And being experts at deferring to others may get you by, but it will not bring you to the full extent of your potential. And there are going to be times in life that you're going to have to make a decision on whether you are really what you say, or are you just saying it because it's the right thing to say in that conversation. You're going to be tested. I remember the election night, I was in Howard University's private room with summer Vice President Kamala Harris's family. She and I talked about it Wednesday. We had National Action Network's Washington breakfast. And I remember when it became clear the vote was not going our way. People were saying, Rev. Mal, what are we going to do now? And I said, well, I'm disappointed, but I'm not going to give up. We've been through stuff tougher than this. I mean, have we gotten Negro amnesia? We were brought here in 1619 to be slaves, unpaid servants, stripped of our names, stripped of our families, sold to different states. We were brought here to be servants. And to make it bad, I was telling some college students the other day, Pastor Johnson, that they never even wrote the Declaration of Independence to King George till 1776. Meaning we've been slaves 150-something years before they declared their own independence. They was already using us. We made cotton king. We made tobacco roll. And out of our labor that was not paid for, they built the strongest country in the world. They built it on our back. And when the South wanted to go its own way and they split the country, Confederate and Union, the argument was over one union. And the North said the way to break them is we got to break slavery. They did not have the Civil War over us. They had the Civil War over tariffs and money. But when the Confederate Army got far enough north, coming to Petersburg and was approaching, hitting the Potomac, Frederick Douglass and others convinced Lincoln, who was reluctant, that if you free the slaves and let them join the Union Army, that we can back them up. And Lincoln reluctantly freed the slaves. My God. And the slaves backed them up. That's why I keep telling students, Lincoln gets credit for something wrong. Lincoln didn't free the slaves freed Lincoln. And he signed a proclamation. Congressman Tay, proclamation is not law, it's effective while he in. He signed a proclamation, Lincoln, saying January 1st, 1863, slaves can walk off the plantation free in the southern Confederate states. That's why watch night meeting for us was always different than other places. Because watch night for us was to sit there and see when the clock hit 12, whether we could walk off the plantation. Now, mind you, when we walked off for 246 years, we could not read and write. It was against the law for us to read and write. 246 years, we couldn't marry. Our children was not named after us. They were named after the slave master. So what do you do when you walk off a plantation broke and illiterate and don't know where your family is? All you got is God on your side. The first thing that black folks ever had in this country was the black church. Our ability to congregate, our ability to call on God. Black politics, black business, black colleges, black fraternities started out of the black church. Because if you have some belief, it's stronger than the social order of your day. What would make them believe they could survive other than to believe that God was on their side? But now you done got a nice job. Got a corner office, got a title in front of your name, and you go to church if it's not golf day, or if the weather's right. But when you was broke, when you had problems, you made Bible study, choir rehearsal, church all day Sunday. Some of us, God got to knock down to get us on our knees to pray. It was the church. And those that wouldn't bow, they came after Adam Powell, stripped him of his power, And I never forget, he sat and told us one day, he used to eat at Jock's place on the corner. And he said that they told him if he walked to the well of the house and just apologized, that maybe, they can't guarantee, but maybe they could get a vote to keep him in. And Mo Udall had wrote a note telling the story, here's what you say, Adam. And when he went to the well, he told them off. And they voted to exclude him. And when he walked by, Mo said, what happened to the note? He said he crumbled it up because Adam couldn't bow. They asked Dr. King not to come out against the war in Vietnam. You celebrating King weekend, celebrate the real Dr. King. Civil rights leaders, his own peers that marched with him, stood with him, said we got to get along with the White House. Lyndon Johnson signed the Civil Rights Bill for us, signed the Voting Rights Bill for us. We can't come out against his war. Dr. King said, but conscience makes me stand up. And they isolated him, but he wouldn't bow. Many of us don't realize that when Dr. King was assassinated, the Gallup poll a week ahead said that he was 56% in the negative among blacks. Day after he was killed, everybody loved Dr. King. And it went back to my text. There was a king named Nebuchadnezzar. Yes, sir. And the king had such power that he decided that having power over mortal men wasn't enough. He was going to challenge the divine powers of God. And he erected this statue, he erected this artifact and said that I want a composer to give me some music. And throughout my kingdom, when you hear the music, I want you to bow to my gods. They always use the culture and the music to get you to bow. I remember many of you know I was close with Adam. I was close with James Brown, the Godfather of Soul. And last time, Sister Butts, I talked to him about 2 weeks before he died. I had just gone down and spoke for him. They changed the arena in Augusta, Georgia, the name after him. And he called me about a week later. He said, Reverend, I said, yes, Mr. Brown. He said, what happened to y'all? I said, what do you mean? He said, I was riding around in one of my cars today and I turned on the radio. He said, when you were growing up, I was singing Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud. Yeah. Aretha was singing Respect. Yeah. Marvin Gaye singing about the war in Vietnam, what's going on. He said, now every record y'all calling yourselves niggas and hoes and bees. He said, don't you understand what you put in kids is what they will grow up wanting to be? I didn't have a dime, but I was proud because James Brown sang it. So they used the music to have you bowing to your own lack of expectation. They have you finger popping to your own demise. Nebuchadnezzar used the music. And he said, when you hear the music, I want you to bow. Somebody came to Nebuchadnezzar, you know there's always some snitches around. And they went, you read the scripture. They went, Daniel 3, read the whole chapter. He said, Almighty King, you know you gotta play this ego. You don't believe it, look at the inauguration tomorrow. You got to play the ego. Said, did you not decree that when the music played, we had to bow to your gods? He said, yes, that is my command. He said, well, I don't want to start no trouble. But there are 3 guys down in the province that you put over, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And I noticed when the music played, they won't bow. He now was threatened. His power was being questioned. He's embarrassed among those he'd ordered. He said, bring me those three. And the Bible says he stood them up in front of him. He said, now, let me review this. I'm going to give you a chance to get this straight. I'm told that when the music plays, you refuse to bow to my gods. You know I've given this edict. And I want you to know that I've got a furnace here, a fiery furnace. And I'm going to heat it up 7 times hotter than has ever been heated before. And I'm going to give you a chance. I'm going to play the music. And if you don't bow, I'm going to throw you in this furnace. In my own imagination, I could see Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego going to a huddle. Shadrach said to Meshach, I don't know about you, but I can't bow. Yes, sir. Because God has been my all in all. I know it's the easy way out. I know that we can explain it later, but I just can't bow. Because God brought me from a mighty long way. Shadrach said, well, I'm with you. I can't bow either because when nothing else would help, love lifted me. Abednego went with him, and they threw him in the fiery furnace, burning him up 7 times hotter than ever before. But before the story ends, Nebuchadnezzar the king looked. Said, wait a minute, I thought I put 3 in there. But it looked like I can count 4. And the 4th one looks like the Son of God. I come to this historic church to tell you I hear Trump's music. But I can't bow. Because the God of Martin Luther King, the God of Adam Powell, oh, they gonna throw us in some furnaces. Sheena, they gonna mess with us. But every furnace they got, God can step in the flames. We come too far to turn around now. We fought too many battles. We suffered too many nights in jail. We buried too many of our martyrs. I can't bow. I tell the story and I let you go. About early 90s, Sister Butts, remember this, I ran for U.S. Senate. I wanted to show I can get a vote. Everybody was calling me a bunch of names. He just a rabble-rouser and all that. I said, well, I'm going to prove I got to follow. So I ran for U.S. Senate. They had never had a black run statewide for Senate. And I ended up running around the state, campaigning to get some votes. And I remember that when the election night came, 4 of us running. Bob Abrams, Attorney General. Geraldine Ferrara was the first woman on the national ticket for vice president. She was in Congress. Elizabeth Holtzman, city controller. And to the shock of them, I came out ahead of Elizabeth Holtzman. I came in 3. And they almost died. I got a call about 3 days later from New York Times reporter. He said, Red Mal, we want to do a profile on you. And I said, what does that mean? He said, well, we want to travel with you and see what you do and see how you do it. I said, all right, that's all right with me. He said, I'll meet you Monday morning. He met me, rode around with me, went to meetings, went to various activities, went to strategy sessions. And he stayed with me all the way through Friday, and then Saturday morning we had our Saturday rallies. We had already started National Action Network. And then the staff meeting after the rally, one of the staff members said to me, David, said, you know, we can't bring them to church with you tomorrow. I said, why not? He said, well, he won't understand our kind of church. I said, yeah, but he can't write my story unless he go to church with me. So we rode around and got late Saturday. I got ready to drop him off. I said, I'm going to pick you up at 8 in the morning. I'm going to bring you to church with me. He said, oh, that'll be wonderful. I always wondered about the black church. I said, what do you mean by that? I didn't know to be offended or what. He said, well, y'all are so lively and passionate, and we are so reserved and quiet in our church. Maybe you can explain some things to me. So I picked him up the next morning. We went. I was one of the ministers at Abyssinian Baptist Church under Dr. Jones, and we stood in the back in the vestibule before I went down to join the ministers in the pulpit. And he said, let me ask you a question. I said, what? He said, there's a lady in the choir loft. She keeps doing this with her hand. He said, well, what does that mean? I said, oh, you don't know that lady's story. That lady 5 years ago was diagnosed with cancer. Doctors told her she only had about 3 months to live. And I remember she came down to prayer meeting. On that Wednesday night, I was sitting in the pulpit, and I heard her praying, saying, Lord, you're a doctor that never lost a patient. There's more healing in the hem of your garment than any pharmacy in town. If it be your will, I want you to heal my body. She was supposed to be dead 4 years and 7 months ago, but she's still here. And every time she come into church, she just waves her hand. He said, I got that, but there's another thing caught my eye. There's a man keep clapping his hands. What's that all about? I said, that man lost everything he had. He had a ferocious fire, took all of his own, all the things he owned, all of his possessions. But God made a way out of no way. We thought he was burnt out, but when you burn out, God will build you back. There is a God that'll make a way out of no way. And every time he thinks about what God did for him, he just claps his hand. I told him, I got to go now. I got to get to the pulpit. He said, wait, I got one more I got to ask you. He said, this one's really strange to me. He said, there's a woman in the middle aisle. She's about 6 rows back. She keeps jumping up out of her seat. She kind of leans to the side. Looks like she's gonna fall down. Look like she can't stand up straight. What's that woman's story? I said, oh, you don't know that woman's story. That woman and her husband came from the South. They built a little business in Brooklyn. They had a grocery store on the corner. They started buying homes around Brooklyn. They was able to afford buying a house out in Hollis, which was middle class black then. And they had a little girl and a little boy. And they moved in as a nice, idyllic home for black folks. But one day, she woke up and her husband had walked out, left her with the little girl and little boy. She didn't know how to make it. They came and took the Cadillac. They came and cut off all the utilities. Her little girl and little boy had to do homework by candlelight. Soon she had to give up the house. She moved into projects in the middle of Brooklyn, and she raised those 2 children on welfare. She used to sneak downtown and do domestic work. But every day she'd walk to the train, she'd tell her little boy who was walking with her, don't worry about where you start in life. Worry about where you're going. That God will make a way for his children. I don't know when he's coming. I don't know when he's coming, but he's always on time. And every time she thinks about how that little girl and that little boy grew up to be somebody, despite growing up on welfare, she jumps up out of her seat, leans to the side, and starts jumping up and down. I said, I gotta go now. I gotta get to the pulpit. Johnson, I took about 3 steps and I turned back around. I said, the reason I know that woman's story is I'm her little boy. He walks with me. He talks with me. He tells me that I'm his own. He been food when I was hungry. He been water when I was thirsty. He's my rock, my sword and shield, my wheel, my wheel, my wheel. In the middle of the wheel, he's the lily of the valley, the bright and morning star. He woke me up this morning, started me on my way. Yes, yes.